Hi everyone, welcome to Sew Against the Grain. My name is Mona. I wanted to make a quick video about the first true dress that I ever made. Recently, Abby from the Crafty Pinup did a video about the first dress she ever made, and it really kind of illustrated how far she's come in her sewing skills, and I thought it would be neat to take a look at the first dress that I ever made and kind of reflect on where I came from. I think this was a really neat experience for me to kind of think back to some of the first things that I've ever made. So earlier on in my sewing career, I had made a lot of Halloween costumes, I'd made curtains, I'd kind of altered t-shirts, I'd made a lot of really easy to sew things, but I'd never really taken on anything out of a woven or anything overly complicated. And I think it was either 2008 or 2009, somewhere around that time frame, so about maybe almost 10 years ago, I ran across a picture on a blog. The blog was Va-Voom Vintage, and the image was of a vintage dress, so it's like kind of like a 1940s dress. And if I can find it, if it's still up on our blog, I will post it. Otherwise, I know I've saved the image, so I can certainly post that as well, so you can see what my inspiration was. But I thought that I would easily be able to replicate that vintage dress with no pattern and nothing to go off of. So that didn't really work out very well, as you will see, but I definitely gave it my best shot. And the dress has never been wearable. I did not realize that it was important to pre-wash fabric, so not only did I make it in such a way that it isn't really wearable, and you'll see what I mean by that, but it also has shrunk way too much for me to be able to wear. It did fit at one point. I could certainly get it on my body, but I couldn't even get it on my dress form to put up for this video, so it's a lot smaller than it started out. So here is, I want to highlight a couple of things on the dress. So here it is. It's kind of a white fabric with a light blue stripe running down it. And I had the presence of mind to realize that the fabric was very see-through, so I did line it. Not well, but I lined it. But I'm just gonna hold it up to my body, and I want you guys to think about what you think the first issue might be. So if I were wearing this and the shoulders of the dress were up on my shoulders, clearly the back is way too high. This would be up on the back of my neck, but this is where the neckline is. So this is where I made the neckline, which clearly would not have worked well. So the neckline is way too low. I do like kind of the split neckline with these buttons. They're not functional, they're just kind of sewed on there with some loops. I did put a zipper in the back, which I think is another one of the issues. So it doesn't look too bad from the back. It's got a little bit of fraying because I didn't finish any of the seams inside. But here's the back of the dress. So here's the back neckline, and I even put a hook and eye in it. Look at that. So here's the back neckline, and here's where the zipper stops, right at the waistline. And I'm not sure why I thought this was a good idea, but the bottom of the skirt is actually pretty fitted. So it has kind of a pencil skirt on the bottom, and I only put the zipper to the waist in the back. So clearly this never fit over my hips. And you can see, I'll bring it in a little bit closer. For the zipper, I actually have the entire thing exposed, and I just kind of folded the fabric over and sewed it down. But being white, it doesn't look terrible, but it's certainly not very functional to only come down to the waist of the dress. And I also wanted to put belt loops on it, so you can see I have literally made a loop of fabric and sewed it on the dress. It's literally a tube. So the belt, I remember when I tried this on, the belt wouldn't really stay on my waist. As you can see, because it's a loop, the belt would move down below the waist or up above the waist. That never really worked out all that well. So here's a sleeve of the dress. So you can see, I'm not sure what happened here, but here's where the shoulder meets the sleeve, and something very dramatic happened here because the sleeve is off by, I don't know, maybe about a ½ inch there, And I don't remember if this was intentional, but I have some like tucking or pleating in the sleeve. I don't know if that was a design element or an accident I was trying to fix. And then it looks like I've tried to make a little cuff on the sleeve. I added a little button, which is a nice touch. I liked buttons even back in the beginning of my sewing career. But if I pull this down, you can see that not only did I not finish any of the edges, the sleeve isn't really tacked up anywhere. It's tacked up with the button and it's tacked up at the seam. Oh, it's not even tacked up at the seam. Nope, it's just loose. It's loose everywhere. So it's tacked up with one button, and apparently I thought that was going to be enough to keep the cuff up. So if we look inside the bodice, I haven't finished any seams. You can see here's the lining, and I kind of sewed it like an interlining apparently. So it's just kind of all, I treated it all as one piece of fabric. So here's the fabric and then the lining. None of these are finished anywhere. Here's, it looks like what I did here is tried to raise the neckline. I tried to raise the neckline, and apparently I just sewed a triangle at the top of the shoulder, which clearly didn't work very well because the neckline is still really too low. But apparently that's where the weirdness in the sleeve came from, is I just sewed a giant triangle, just left the fabric in there apparently. On the other side, I have another giant triangle trying to raise the bodice, but this triangle is smaller than the other side, so I wasn't even able to be symmetrical with that apparently. And this other sleeve looks pretty similar, where the shoulder sleeve joins looks a little bit better, but it's pretty similar with the button holding up the sleeve cuff, and yep, nope, nothing tacking it on the bottom. So that is just wide open with raw fabric. So that's the bodice. Here's some more giant literal belt loops here. And then the skirt is basically, I'll step back so you can see a little bit more of it. So it's basically kind of a pencil skirt all the way down, and I did have the presence of mind to line it, so it has a lining as well. But as you can see here, I put a kick pleat in, but nothing is finished inside the kick pleat. So there's little strings everywhere, and I see more stitching up here on the kick pleat. So apparently the kick pleat was 4 or 5 inches longer than it is now, and apparently I decided I was probably flashing people, so I went ahead and shortened the kick pleat. So the kick pleat is here, lots of loose strings. I think my hemming job leaves a lot to be desired. So clearly I haven't ironed this since I've never worn it, but I just did a straight stitch across the entire bottom. Let's take a look at the inside. So here's the inside of the skirt. Here's the hem. I can feel a lot of like bits of folded fabric in the hem too, so I'm not sure what that is, if that's the lining or something else that I put in there that made sense at the time. But here's kind of an idea. So here's the lining is just kind of hanging out here, and then I just folded up this fabric and literally just top stitched it. And like I said, I can feel bits of folded fabric in the hem. So apparently I did something quite interesting with that. So yeah, this is the first dress. So this is about 10 years ago of unwearable vintage inspired dress. Thankfully, I think I've come a long way from that first dress. But I think that as important as it is to share mistakes, I think, my opinion, my personal philosophy is that when you make a mistake, it's important to really own up to it. And I think that should extend to social media. So if you make a mistake sewing, I try and keep those a part of the process that I share with people about things that I've sewn, so that it's really clear that nobody's perfect at this. And sewing is a hard skill to learn. It's a very technical skill, but it's also got a lot of creativity to it, and sometimes things just don't work out the way that we hope they would. And this dress is a great illustration of that. I know it was right around the time that I made this dress that I realized that vintage sewing patterns being reissued was a thing. So I started buying a lot of reissued vintage patterns, some of which were sewn terribly. The first couple were awful, I'll admit that, but they've definitely gotten better over time, which is great. So I hope that this was interesting for you. I know I loved seeing Abby's video about her first dress, and her experience was, I think, a little bit more positive than mine, because she was able to wear her dress. And although some of the construction is not as well done as she would do now, she definitely loved the hell out of that dress, which I think is really great. And I was never able to do that for this dress, but I think it's important that I've hung on to it and can look at it and kind of reflect on where I've come from. So I hope that for those of you that are starting your sewing career or new into your sewing career, this was helpful to see all of the atrocious mistakes I made in the past on a dress that I was really excited to make. I spent a lot of time sewing this, and I thought about it a lot. I did a lot of planning. I remember taking my measurements and graphing those out on, I probably used like computer paper or printer paper stuck together, or maybe parchment paper. I'm not sure what I actually made the pattern on, or a newspaper. I don't really remember. But I remember measuring my waist and my bust and my hips and my, you know, arm width and kind of everything that I thought would be important to make the dress. I remember measuring those really carefully and kind of putting those to paper, not realizing that seam allowances were important to include. I know for sure there were no seam allowances. And like I said, I also didn't realize that pre-washing fabric was really important either. So there were a lot of things stacked against me for this dress, but again, I made a dress. So I know that I felt very proud about finishing it, even though it didn't really kind of work out the way that I hoped, but I'm really glad I made it. I'm really glad I saved it, because I thought it was really good opportunity to kind of look back on it. But this was my first dress. So let me know, if you've been sewing for a while, does your dress look as bad as mine does? Was it completely unwearable from the very beginning? I hope it's yes, because that will make me feel a lot better. But I definitely want to hear about your first dress or the first thing you ever sewed. I think it's important to kind of commiserate when we have some of these mistakes come up. So let me know in the comments. I love to engage. If you've seen the video and you have questions or comments or thoughts, I'd love to engage with you. So if you have any thoughts about the first dress you made or pictures of it, I'd love to see it. Definitely let me know. I think it's a really great conversation topic for people who've been sewing for a while to kind of reflect back on. Or if you're new into sewing and you're much better at it than me and your first dress was very wearable and beautiful, definitely let me know that too. I'm excited to hear about people's successes early on as well. So thank you for joining me for this video. I really enjoyed making it and kind of reflecting back on the first dress I made. So I will see you in the next video. Bye!